My name is Carol Sandy. And when I thought about this idea, this concept, I actually was listening to a podcast on codependency. And it kind of creeps into the room when I'm with clients as well, too. We are all in the process of wanting to improve our relationships. But what I recognize is that sometimes with people, we're at a place where we feel like we're working harder than our partner sometimes. We're working harder than our friends. But we sometimes feel so overwhelmed by if there's a disagreement. And so these kinds of topics come into the room, and we look at that. And so I did some research and I found Darlene, and I was really excited. I called her right away. Darlene, I literally called you on your phone at home that day. So according to Darlene, some wonderful things that she says is for codependents, being open and honest in close relationships may be difficult. And we'll get into what is it and all those kinds of things. Instead of being assertive, instead of kind of being initiating action and meeting your own needs, you kind of hide. You find yourself kind of reacting or feeling. This is something that comes up often, feeling responsible for a lot of things. We feel like it's our fault or we're really guilty. And so this also kind of comes into the room. And then the inability to say no, right? The inability to just say, I can't do it or I can't make it. So what I want people to think about, maybe they're thinking about themselves, maybe they're thinking about other people in their lives, get a picture of that person or something that kind of sounds familiar to you and just kind of hold on to it. Again, we don't have a lot of time, but we're just going to touch on, I always say, a nice little light touch on this subject area, and just to get you thinking. I'd like to introduce Darlene Lancer. Thank you so much. And I want to just briefly talk a little bit, share your bio a little bit. Darlene Lancer is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's an expert author on relationships and codependency. She's counseled couples and individuals for over 30 years, and she coaches internationally. Her books include Codependency, Shame, and Codependency, 8 Steps to Freeing the True You, and Codependency for Dummies, and 7 ebooks. Okay, 7 ebooks, including 10 Steps to Self-Esteem, How to Speak Your Mind, Become Assertive and Set Limits, Dealing with Narcissists, 8 Steps to Raise Self-Esteem, Setting Boundaries with Difficult People, I'm Not Perfect, I'm Only Human, How to Beat Perfectionism, that's a great topic as well, and Freedom from Guilt and Blame. So finding self-forgiveness. They're all available on Amazon, and you can jump online. She's very active on social media. That's how I got a chance to follow her and just kind of know more about her work. So Darlene, thank you so much for being here. And if you want to add anything about yourself that you'd like the audience to know about, feel free to do that.
Well, I've been counseling people for over 30 years. And about 9 years ago, Wiley Publications asked me to write Codependency for Dummies. And then I realized that all my work was focused on helping people individuate, which would be the psychological, term, and overcome codependency. And I had done that in my own life. I was married to a personality disordered alcoholic. I attended 12-step meetings for many years. And I think at that time, probably over 30 years. And I had a lot of clinical training. And so doing the book helped me really focus what I had already been doing. And I realized, well, I'm the perfect person to do this book. I know this topic inside and out.
Right.
I've lived it, I studied it. And then after that book came out, Hazelden Foundation that focuses on addiction, and they have a lot of publications. And they asked me to write Conquering Shame, which is really the core of codependency. And it was interesting to me, when I first wrote Codependency for Dummies, I thought that I would get people inquiring about dealing with an alcoholic or an addict. And to my surprise, all these people that were partnered with narcissists and other forms of abuse were contacting me. So that was, then I ended up writing a book on dealing with a narcissist. and did a lot of research in that area as well, because
Mm-hmm.
that was what people wanted. And the ebooks that I wrote are all e-workbooks.
Right. Okay.
Because, yeah, overcoming codependency, a lot of it is about learning skills. And codependents, when they first, the biggest obstacle to recovery is denial.
Right.
So it's called the cornerstone or the hallmark of addiction, whether you're a addict in the sense of an alcoholic or a drug user or a codependent. And so coming out of denial is the first step.
Nice.
And then it's really about learning skills,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
skills that we didn't learn growing up, and doing some, if you had a lot of trauma in your childhood, overcoming the shame and trauma of that.
I like that. It's true because so for example, today I was speaking to someone about parentification and some really heavy stuff, but I recognize it's true. We just have to first accept where we are in that moment before we can kind of take the steps or the changes that we need to take to feel better, to feel healthier. Um, you say something really that's very important in terms of, you say codependency is learned. Can you give me a little bit more about that in terms of when you share that, what comes up for you, and what's important for people to keep in mind?
Well, we're not born feeling ashamed, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
And we develop a self in relationship to our parents. Every child, I mean, this is a little bit of answering like how it starts.
Right.
Every child needs, early child research has shown every child needs mirroring and empathy, and in addition, they need help.
Mm-hmm.
So some parents don't do either, or some parents would just say, "Oh, you're so sad," and or you're angry, and that's all they do. They don't help you to find solutions or comfort you.
Yes.
They've done studies with babies crying, and a mother will go in and she'll talk to the baby, but she won't hold the baby.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and then the baby keeps crying in distress. And then in terms of shame, every child needs to feel that it's both parents. It's not enough that one parent does, but both parents want a relationship with you as an individual, not because you get good grades or you're pretty or you're thin or you play sports or whatever it is your parents' ideal is,
Mm-hmm.
that you are loved for who you are. And it's not enough to say, I love you, that they want to talk to you. They're interested in you. They want a relationship with you. Otherwise, children feel that they don't matter.
Right.
And that's what happens. And then boundaries are learned. Self-esteem is learned. Communication is modeled and learned. This is all in your family, and codependency is transgenerational. So if a parent doesn't have self-esteem, they don't have good boundaries, they won't respond appropriately. If they weren't nurtured, they don't know how to nurture. Like the study that I just mentioned, where a parent, she knew she was on camera. I saw this on PBS actually, and she goes into the room where her baby is crying, and she talks to it, and then the camera shows she actually stepped backwards. This is totally unconscious, and backwards and forwards. It's very ambivalent. So these are things that you learn by osmosis and how you were raised. In fact, when my first child was born, a friend came over. I was diapering my baby, and she says, "Oh, you're being rough with this." I had no idea.
Right.
This was just instinctively, I guess how I was treated.
Mm-hmm.
So nurturing, again, is learned. And so, parents want to know, like, how to not pass on their codependency. It's like, heal your own.
Right. Start
You
with.
want to raise your children's self-esteem, work on raising your own.
Nice.
Yeah.
You said something that, and we always say that. How do we delight in our children? Just delight in them. How do we just enjoy them without them having to perform for us? and how important that is. Um, so I know I kind of jumped. I wanted to really. So how do we define codependency, Darlene?
Well, there's no collective definition, there's no consensus.
Mm-hmm.
So in writing the book, I did a lot of thinking about it, as well as reading other people. And some people define it in terms of a relationship. One of the first popular authors was Melody Beatty. I read her book maybe, well, I guess I don't even know how to tell you how long ago it was. Came out in the 70s.
Yes.
And so she defines it in terms of a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And other people would say, well, it's depends on define it in terms of the family system you grew up with. Subby defines it in terms of strict rules. And I tend to think of it as a disorder of the self.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you're not in a relationship,
Mm-hmm.
your codependency will show up. You won't realize it, but somebody, a clinician might be able to point out how you might abuse yourself, or you have trouble taking initiative. So it's, or you have compulsive behaviors. So to me, it's someone who your thinking and your behavior revolve around someone else,
Right.
rather than connecting to your own innate feelings, thoughts, needs. And so the wiring gets kind of backwards. With a codependent will think about try to imagine what their partner is thinking, what they want, what they need. Are they mad at me? What do they mean by that? Why are they doing that? And then they adapt their behavior around what they imagine someone else is thinking, or what the other person actually says.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than and then their communication gets all convoluted, because it's not coming from, it's not responding, they were reacting.
Right.
What I need, what I think, what I want.
Right.
And the first step is like getting in touch with that, identifying it. So you have to reconnect the wires.
Mm-hmm.
When you're going outward, it's like coming from here. And then you have to learn the language,
Right.
like how to express it. You have to overcome obstacles and fears about, well, what if they don't like me if I say that? Or what if the person leaves me? Or what if they're angry? Or what if they're hurt? And you have to let go of all of that and start being true to yourself, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to learn who you are. So it's a learning process.
Right. And I wonder, are there times in society where that behavior is celebrated? I think in terms of where you're just sort of giving to everybody else, and that kind of behavior is kind of like welcomed in some ways. Do you find that? And that kind of makes it hard for people to move in a direction where they're checking in with themselves first?
Well, there's a lot of messages like that of being, first of all, there's women, naturally, I think our brains are wired to tend, they use the word tend to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we, feel better in ourselves.
Right.
But the idea of a mother or a person to sacrifice, that's idealized, self-sacrifice.
Yes, yes.
They don't call it being a martyr. Or, turn the other cheek.
Mm-hmm.
So there's messages in society, and then also, especially for men, it's like showing your feelings is weak,
Mm-hmm.
or to be strong and being successful and being ambitious. But maybe that's not even important to you. So you striving to get approval,
right,
get a societal approval, or make money, or your parents' approval. And you end up doing, I was a lawyer for over 20 years, and it wasn't even really what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
So getting back to who you really are.
Right.
So my career change over 30 years ago was part of my healing process too.
Nice. Wow.
I wanted to be a therapist when I was 12. I was reading Freud. So, and then Carl Jung when I was a teenager. And so there's a lot of messages like that, or being self-sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
That's idealized.
Right.
Or reacting. You see it on a romance. You know, movies are all about the romance, and that's when the movie ends, when the girl gets the guy or the guy gets the girl, and that's the end of the story.
Mm,
That's when that's when the relationship begins. You know?
that's right.
So there's a lot of messages. Oh, another one. I've had clients where their Christian upbringing told them like anger is bad, so that's shaming your feelings, or that pride is equals conceit. So they could never, the opposite of shame is healthy pride.
Right.
And then your posture is like, oh, I feel good about myself.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're rounding your shoulders and like this, it's usually from shame or depression, or you're protecting yourself,
Mm-hmm.
like a child will hang its head.
So they
Yeah.
never move to that place of just feeling comfortable in themselves.
Proud. That's healthy.
Yeah.
That's not like false pride,
Yes. Yeah.
or it's not conceit. And
Mhm.
humility doesn't mean being meek or weak. It
Right.
means you accept your flaws and you accept your strengths.
Nice.
You have an accurate perception of yourself.
Perception. Nice. Nice.
Yeah. And you don't feel you're better than others, but you don't feel you're less than others.
Right. And so shame kind of finds its way through that because um when when you explain shame and codependency, that relationship that they create with each other, it's that very place where shame is winning. Is it that shame is louder at times?
Well, I couldn't say which started first.
Mm,
In my book, Conquering Shame, I say they co-emerge.
okay.
So it's not like, you know, it's the chicken or the egg kind of
Yeah.
thing. Because your parent is going to have shame and is going to have low self-esteem, and they're going to be codependent. And so then that's their interaction with the child. I mean, so just for an example, like one of my children, when they were infant, cried a lot, and I couldn't comfort him. And I took it as rejection.
Right. Yeah.
And, or that he would cry and be angry. And I didn't know like he had colic actually. Till later. I was very young, like 23 or something. So I took this personally. So there's this famous analyst who would say the baby needs to bite the mother's breast, which means, I'm not going to go into psychoanalysis, but
Yeah.
basically it means that the mother should be able to accept the child's anger. So
Mm-hmm.
children, you know, the terrible twos, or, you know, children and babies get angry. So if you punish, it's bad enough to punish a child for anger, but then if you take it personally. So for another example, so my late mother was a narcissist. And I observed her, I was already in graduate school. I observed her with my toddler nephew in her condo.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just about 18 months old, maybe close to 2, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And he was kind of walking around her apartment, looking at things and investigating. And this is normal for a toddler.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother's reaction was very telling. She said, look, he thinks he owns the place.
Yeah.
So she was reacting to a natural instinct of a toddler, like he's taking over.
Right. Almost like an adult. Couldn't separate the two.
Exactly. Like, because that's a narcissist, there's no boundaries.
Mm.
So if you have a narcissist, addict parent, maybe, or another a borderline parent, they may not have, or just a parent with not good boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
they're not going to see you as separate. They're going to personalize everything, and then they're going to react to that.
Right.
So then the baby will start to have to please the parent and look for cues. They become hypervigilant. And instead of the mother tuning into the baby, and this is how you identify your feelings and needs, and saying, what is she feeling? Or what does he want? What does he need? And then empathizing and meeting that need, it gets reversed.
Right.
And this is how codependency starts. It's like the baby's like, oh, the mother's raising her eyebrows or knitting her eyebrows. She must be angry. I better not cry.
Right.
It's life or death, right?
I need
The
her.
baby needs that parent to survive,
Right.
and they don't get to form a self. They're like trying to gauge what the parent wants and needs.
Nice.
And
Nice.
that's kind of how it starts. And then the baby doesn't, toddler doesn't feel important.
Mm-hmm.
Their needs and wants, or the mother, or maybe there's just too many children, so they get neglected. Or the mother and father are fighting all the time. I've seen this a lot with clients, and the child's just left out. I've even had clients where the child has to go in and mediate with the parents,
Yes. Yeah.
or a parent dies, or is divorced, and that's a trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And then the custodial parent is so distraught or doesn't have financial means, and they don't, or they cling to their child in order to meet their own needs. There's so many ways that parenting is hard, and there's no such thing as a perfect parent.
Mm-hmm.
But if a parent is shaming, I observed this. I was at a ice cream parlor, and a parent had a cone while the child was waiting for theirs or something, and was asking the child was asking for a bite or a lick of the ice cream, and the parent was like taunting the child and like holding it away, like, come reach for it. And to me that was shaming,
Mm-hmm.
because it's shaming your need rather than, oh, you want, here, you can have it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like humiliating.
Mm-hmm. And it also
And
depends what the child's telling themselves in that moment as well,
yeah,
too.
right. So it was, maybe that was my story, but it wasn't empathizing with the child. It was teasing, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of parents think teasing is, they don't realize to a child is very vulnerable.
Right.
The teasing is shaming.
Right. And that impacts their self-esteem, right? I would imagine as well.
Yeah. So I'm not important, or my needs don't matter, or I shouldn't be angry. I shouldn't have all these feelings.
So
So
how does one now as an adult start to recognize or pay attention to their behaviors in terms of if they're actually recognizing that their self-esteem is getting in the way of their relationships, they're blaming themselves, they're frustrated, they're feeling left behind, when in reality their friends invited them and they said no, but they're still feeling left behind. And so I kind of, meet with clients that in spaces like that. What are some ways that you kind of walk along with your clients when this is kind of happening and supporting them through that?
well, I would say generally people don't realize they have low self-esteem.
Mm,
Some people, it's really clear because there's different, I talk about different kinds of shame. And there's shame that's kind of global,
mhm,
and a person is like conscious of it all the time.
mhm.
But most people, even like successful people, don't realize. I was teaching self-esteem, and I didn't realize that I still had shame underneath. I
Nice.
was, my unconscious was telling me in a dream.
Hmm.
I went into psychoanalysis, and
Yeah, yeah, no, that's good stuff.
so but so the first step is just acknowledging it. And there are a lot of signs that people aren't aware. So let me point out a few of those before we jump into the solution. And that is feeling guilty a lot, apologizing all the time. You're 5 minutes late and you go on for another 5 minutes apologizing.
Mhm.
It's something that codependents do all the time. They apologize for other people, or feeling overly responsible. If you're in an abusive relationship, if you're in a relationship with someone who's an addict,
Mhm.
maybe not for a few months, and then you realize it and you move on. But if you're in a relationship where your needs are not getting met, where you're being criticized, you're being abused, um, or you feeling like the person's emotionally unavailable to you,
Mhm.
and you're not getting your intimacy needs, these are signs. These are just some signs.
Mhm.
If you're a perfectionist and you can't understand that if anything is like out of place, or if you make mistakes, if you procrastinate a lot, if you have trouble making decisions, you're indecisive. What else? Highly defensive,
Right.
overdoing. I think you mentioned in the beginning, someone who's doing more than other people at work, or doing more than 50% of the relationship. You have trouble saying no. You have a lot of fears. So those are some signs of being very self-critical. If people tell you you're hard on yourself, you probably don't realize it, but you probably are. So the first thing I say to people is start writing down all your negative self-talk.
Nice.
Because what you're unconscious of, you're not going to be able to change. You have to get really conscious of it. And everybody has an inner critic.
Mm-hmm.
And we call it like the super ego, but sometimes it can be very harsh and go to the point of self-loathing. And some people feel like they're that voice wants to destroy them.
Mm-hmm.
So write it all down.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my workbooks is 10 Steps to Self-Esteem. And it helps people. There's 10 simple steps on overcoming self-criticism. And you want to turn that critic into that negative critic into a positive coach.
Right.
And there's ways. You're not going to eradicate it, because sometimes it'll tell you, you're eating too much, you're not getting enough sleep, or you need to prepare for that exam or something.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's helpful, but it's learned. Often it's mimicking messages you got from a critical parent.
Right.
So there's steps you can take to change that voice.
Right.
So it's encouraging and a positive voice.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing
Nice.
I tell people to do.
So just slowing down the thoughts, slowing down paying attention to the thoughts.
Writing it down. Yeah. Wear a rubber. I have a little YouTube. I always say, wear a rubber band.
Yeah.
Like they tell people that, want to stop smoking. The Schick method, I think they said you wear a rubber band and snap yourself every time you want a cigarette.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you become more conscious of it. And by the way, don't forget the shoulds.
Mm-hmm.
Shoulds. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Oh, I should do this, or I shouldn't have done that.
Right.
Well, that was a big mistake.
Right.
So intolerance for that,
Mm-hmm.
because that's part of being human, The next thing is I would write down conversations you have at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Try to identify if you were authentic. Were you honest? If not, why not?
Right. What was happening there?
Yeah, like analyze them. What was I feeling? What did I say? What did the other person say? Did I need to set a boundary?
Mm-hmm.
If I did I say yes when I meant to say no? And if practice, they teach you this in 12-step programs. It's like if you're in a tight spot and you're having trouble saying yes or no to something, just say, I'll think about it. Let me get back to you.
Yeah.
Give yourself time to, instead of these automatic reactions, to respond. And that's that going inwards, having an inner chat with yourself, writing it down and saying, what do I really want? And then there's this ebook and a webinar I wrote on how to be assertive, how to speak your mind, and learning to identify your feelings. My Codependency for Dummies has a list of about 200 feelings. You can Google them too, a bunch of feelings, and try to be able to identify your feelings. Because if they've been shamed, and I talk about shame bonding in conquering shame, so your needs could get shamed, your feelings could get shamed, so your wants could get shamed. Like, oh, you can get shamed for asking. Some parents saying, like, what do you think you are? Why are you even asking for it? We can't afford that.
Right. Yeah. Why?
Or,
why even?
so that's shaming you, like the natural instinct to want it. Or you should never eat between meals, and like So your hungers, you get shamed for wanting
Mhm.
or asking,
Mhm.
or I mentioned before, shaming for anger, or
Mm.
sexual needs could get shamed, particularly for women.
Mm.
Like, oh, that's men want sex. You shouldn't want sex or something like that. Or
And I think
maybe,
of a very rigid parent too, right? Like I feel
yes,
like rigid behavior, parenting styles can also kind of shed can increase that shame for kids as well.
absolutely, because it's overcorrecting and there's only one way to do things. And
Mhm.
by the way, an obsessive compulsive or perfectionistic mother, I think they have some research, can cause codependency in children.
Mhm.
So,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
that leads to shaming and perfectionism. There is some genetic component, I think, of perfectionism, but it's also behavioral if you observe it in your parents.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know. So writing these things down can help you get some distance from them,
Right.
and then you can practice, how to be assertive, which is not reacting. It's saying, making I messages.
Right.
Codependents typically say, "Well, what do you want to do?" But they don't want to take responsibility, and they say, "Well, I don't want to say that because that'll hurt their feelings."
Right.
But that's a cop out. It's really you're afraid if the other person's upset, then it'll jeopardize the relationship. So it's not really so much about hurting their feelings. It's about breaking the bond or the connection with the person, or maybe they'll be angry at you. So it's really self-protection.
And not how to and not being able to sit in that uncomfortable feeling of if their partner gets upset or if their friend gets upset with them. They're almost so worried about what that would feel like for them.
Anxiety, because this
Mhm.
goes back to the abandonment trauma in childhood.
Mhm.
Parent is turning away from you or punishing you in anger, or it
Mhm.
breaks that bond of like, you're important to me.
Yeah.
They stop talking to you, or they withdraw love rather than just go to your room, and then they, after the punishment, it's like, okay, you're forgiven,
Yeah,
or it's
really.
consequences. It's not like, I've seen parents that they just are very like mean
Mhm.
and they're punishing.
Mhm.
So, and it doesn't have to be physical abuse. It could just be a look,
Right.
just cold, parent going cold.
Mhm.
That's like, could just be even more hurtful than being punished or
Mhm.
slapped or something.
Mhm. And
The
it's so
withdrawal
funny.
of love.
Parents have to know their child too, I would imagine, right? In terms of if you're seeing the response of that, your child's response to that is quite fearful, and they're having a hard time that they need to pay attention to what's happening right before them rather than just kind of taking care of themselves or feeling better.
Right. But the parent that we're describing, that's going to go over their head. They're probably,
Absolutely.
they're not going to notice that. So
I had a question about not being able to make decisions. I think that comes up quite a bit. Mm.
indecisiveness.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of factors. The first might be just like really knowing what you want.
Mhm.
And then it might be having value of that. So one of the steps is in recovery is like identifying feelings, identifying needs, identifying wants, because this is, if it's been shamed, it's like going to be in denial, it's going to be maybe unconscious, maybe repressed.
You're right.
So this is really hard for codependents. It's very simple. Like, you meet your needs, you feel good. You don't meet your needs, you feel bad.
Mhm.
It's not, you know, um, higher math, but it's really hard. It's really hard because codependents are so tuned into meeting everybody else's needs, figuring out what someone else wants, pleasing them. Because underneath, they think, if I'm loved, then I'm lovable. These
Right.
are deep-seated beliefs that you have to, in my books, in my blogs, in therapy, that you start to challenge these beliefs. You're lovable whether or not someone loves you. but it's kind of backwards with codependence. So, so identifying these things that all that I mentioned, and then honoring them. So making decisions would be honoring your needs. So maybe you want to take a vacation, but you have the belief that you don't deserve it, or you shouldn't spend money on it.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe that was an example in your family that never took a vacation.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that makes decisions hard is, and this is very prevalent, is that because codependents have a strong inner critic, they will judge themselves. So they're afraid. Sometimes they think what other people will judge them, but it's usually themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They project their critic out there.
Right.
So they think, well, if I do this, if I make this decision, if I stay later at work, I'll judge myself for not being with my children,
Mm-hmm.
or spending more time parenting.
Mm-hmm.
If I spend more time parenting, then I'll judge myself that I'm not making more money or I'm not getting promoted at work. So they're going to be judged either way.
Right.
And they go back, they may not even be aware of this. They're just kind of stuck,
Right.
paralyzed, because, and it's their own thinking process. They feel like their whole life is a catch-22. Every move they make, there's going to be a mistake, or they're going to think I should have, then again, the shoulds.
Yes. Yes.
But when you start to see, and this is like a real epiphany, when you start to realize, my telling you won't change this, but when you start to see it in your own behavior, in your own mind, that, aha, if my critic gets me coming and going, then that's freedom. Oh, I could just ignore it.
Right. Let it pass through, right? Come in.
Yeah. And actually, there's probably a middle ground, but you can't see that because another symptom is cognitive distortions, especially with perfectionists,
Right.
black and white thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, right or wrong, good or bad, up or down. And rather than, well, maybe I could do something, a middle ground.
Mm-hmm.
There's no grays.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, because that was what they were taught.
That you had to be right or wrong. Like you are either right or wrong, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, or maybe there's a solution.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's maybe you could do some of that work at home, and then you're with your children and you're working.
Right.
I mean, this is not, I'm not talking about COVID, but.
Right.
So you wouldn't like think about those things.
Right.
Because you're stuck in this, like, am I good or bad, or so.
So giving them space, right? Giving themselves space to kind of think through what are the possibilities.
Yeah, and that, oh, I have a choice.
Yeah.
It's just up to me. I could choose either one. It's just a question of what are my priorities.
And so I was asking, and you mentioned it a little bit at the start. Is there a difference between men and women when codependency shows up? Do you notice a difference in how they see themselves or show up, or are there just similarities?
No, I think it's pretty similar. I think there's differences when it comes to shame, because there's cultural ideals for men and women are different.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if a lot of women feel shame if they don't have children, or if they're not a good parent,
Mm-hmm.
or if they leave a marriage and there's children, so there's a whole emphasis on mothering and parenting. And for men, it's more like making money and being a provider.
Mm-hmm.
For women, there's so much emphasis on appearance and their weight and attractiveness. And men, it might be more strength and virility. So those are some differences. So if they're out of work, or if they show their feelings, they may have more shame about feeling weak or unworthy, failure. Whereas a woman might, if she feels like she's unattractive, or not a mother, or not beautiful or something like that. So those are that difference. And the other thing that I notice with clients is that when a person is in a abusive or destructive relationship, typically women will want to know why their husband or their partner is doing this. Why is he says he loves me, or why is he hurting me? And a man will say, what should I do?
Yeah.
What's the solution?
Tell me that this first step, the second step. Yeah.
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 And it's actually more effective because codependents like to figure out the other person's what's in their head instead of what, I have a blog I published on Can a Narcissist Love?
Mm.
And, for years I wondered, in my own family, I wondered if my mother really loved me or not, because
Right.
I felt unloved a lot of the time.
Right.
So, but in a relationship, I wrote this deeply researched paper on what is love, and I think it's very enlightening to a lot of people. But at the end, I say it's the wrong question.
Right.
Are your needs getting met?
Mm-hmm. What do you need? Yeah.
Are you happy in the relationship?
Mm-hmm. I had one question, and before we kind of end, and I know you have to go, I wanted to ask, and I think we've kind of touched on so many things in terms of that link between trauma and codependency, and how really it's kind of like they kind of pair well together. And I just wanted you to kind of give a little bit more context around that a little bit, or an example if that's quicker.
Okay, well, I don't think trauma in itself creates codependency. For instance, you could grow up in a war zone. There could be your house burned down. You could be raped. It's not going to lead to codependency.
Mhm.
But the trauma of emotional abandonment in childhood, that's what causes shaming too.
Right.
And that leads to codependency in the ways that I've discussed.
Right. So early childhood.
Yeah. And then, living in an abusive marriage or relationship, or for a number of years, where your self-esteem is being
Mhm.
shattered daily and your needs aren't getting met, that's traumatic.
Absolutely.
A betrayal can be traumatic.
Mhm.
But I think people can recover more quickly if they had a healthy childhood, if they had good self-esteem before.
That
But the
resilience.
problem is that's usually not the case. That's why they're in this relationship for a long time.
Nice.
I mean, if sometimes I've had people tell me that, well, it was a wonderful romance and relationship until they got married, and then the person started changing,
Mhm.
and typically like a narcissist or something. But as we discuss it, they say, oh yeah, there was those things, there was that I overlooked.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah. There were things that they missed along the way.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, in my own case, when I was dating my husband to be, I noticed that he mostly talked about himself.
Mhm.
And I thought that was kind of interesting, that was kind of odd, but I didn't mind it that much
Mhm.
because he was very interesting and charming. He was it didn't bother me.
Right.
And that he also worried a lot. And I thought, well, yeah. But
Now that
it,
you reflect.
it turned out to be like total obsession, constant, like the whole marriage. But I got early training to be a therapist. I could listen.
Mm.
So
You got,
I decided to get paid for it.
yeah, put in the time. You put in the time.
Yeah.
So I wanna really thank you for your time. I wanted to know, just I've been asking everyone that's been on this call, how have you been taking care of yourself during COVID and over the last 6 months? What are some things that you've been doing to just take good care of your overall well-being and getting
Well, one
through it?
thing, yes. Well, I did two things today. I'll just share with you. And that is, and I have a blog on 10 or 12 tips on self-nurturing.
Hmm.
Again, that's one of the skills that we don't learn if we
Nice.
weren't nurtured. And I do have a self-love meditation on my website that I encourage people to practice, because there's language that you have to learn to kind of adopt and internalize. If you had a parent that was comforting and loving, you start talking to yourself that way. But
Nice.
if you don't, then
Hmm.
you don't have that language.
Hmm.
Anyway, so I spent some time today just laying down and sinking deeper, being with my breath, sinking deeper into grounding myself, like deeper into the carpet or deeper into the floor or the bed, whatever you're laying on, and just be with your breath.
Hmm.
Just be with yourself.
Hmm.
It calms the nervous system tremendously. Breathe with your breath. And so I was breathing into my belly and letting it rise into my ribs. So when we're anxious, we're going to tighten. I've done a lot of somatic work, and I incorporate this with clients too. So we'll tighten our diaphragm, like right under our rib cage,
Hmm.
and our breathing will be shallow, and it'll restrict our digestion. It'll restrict the flow of blood and breath to the rest of our body. So a baby and an animal, you'll see its belly rise and fall, and that's when you're relaxed.
Hmm.
So, practice belly breathing. And then instead of like trying to breathe into your chest this way,
Hmm.
that's incorrect. You like breathe into your belly, and then it'll naturally rise to the side.
Right.
But you can put your hands on your heart.
Right.
And on YouTube, I have 3 recovery exercises. It's a YouTube. And I have a heart, um, listening to your heart meditation there, and another one that's a grounding one,
Hmm.
visualizing yourself as a tree with roots that go into the earth. And another breathing exercise is exhaling, making a sound.
Through this. Yeah.
And researchers show that that calms the nervous system and it's good for pain.
Nice.
Or sound. So doing that like long exhales, like 20 times. And you can, check in with yourself before and after.
Hmm.
The other thing is I took a walk.
Nice. Yeah.
So go outside, get fresh air, take a walk. I had socially distanced picnics
Yeah.
with my grandchildren, with friends. So you can do that. Um, and so you still have connection with people.
Right. Right.
I think Zoom is great, but I think in person is, for
So much.
me, it's
Yeah.
better. So
Absolutely.
even if you can't hug the person, at least you can make eye contact in real life.
Yeah. In some way, I love that. Um, I want to thank you. Someone just said they're enjoying tonight, and it was great, and that's awesome. So I really appreciate that comment. And again, we really appreciate you, Darlene. Are there ways that what are some ways that people can get in contact with you?
Sure.
What are your projects? Anything that you're working on right now? If you could share.
What I've been working on is like birthing a baby. It's taken so long. A new website. So I
Um,
can't send you there yet.
okay, okay.
But if you're on my mailing list, you'll get an announcement when it comes out, hopefully in a month.
Okay.
But on my website, whatiscodependency.com,
Mm-hmm.
if you forget that, you could just Google my name and then you'll get there eventually.
Mm-hmm.
But there's links to Facebook where I post every day.
Mm-hmm.
I have a codependency recovery page in my profile, and Instagram, I post every day, Pinterest, LinkedIn, on Twitter. So I'm on all those, and you can listen to a lot of my recordings on my website on the media page.
Okay.
There's links to prior talks and seminars. and a lot of them are on Clip, CLYP
Mhm.
.IT. Clip it.
Okay.
A lot of my talks are there. Some are on SoundCloud. I have a YouTube channel, YouTube,
You
and
were
some are
busy.
there. Yeah, well, it's been
I
a
love it.
number of years I've been doing this. So, but on my website is links to everything.
Right.
And I encourage you to sign up to my mailing list, and you'll get free 14 tips for letting go.
Nice.
And you'll get my monthly blog, and you'll get when I do an annual newsletter. So I don't like to email people very much because I don't like getting a lot of emails. But I do have a monthly blog that I write, and I try to balance it between abusive narcissistic relationships and codependency, because people are interested in both.
That's great.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much for your time, and have a great evening.
Okay, and you have a great weekend. Okay.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thanks to
Bye.
everybody listening.
Thanks for everyone. Take care. Have a good evening.